Welcome to today's edition of Daytime Dialogues. It is my honor to welcome to our show today Rabbi Dr. Stuart Halpern, who is the senior advisor to the provost of Yeshiva University. In other words, the number 2 when it comes to academics at YU, and also the deputy director of YU Strauss Center for Torah and Western Thought. In addition to that, he is a prolific author, having edited 17 books, including Esther in America, The Scrolls Interpretation in and Impact on the United States, Proclaim Liberty Throughout the Land, the Hebrew Bible in the United States. And we can go on, including his many columns and articles that he has written. He has degrees from the University of Pennsylvania, from Revel, a doctorate in education, from Azrieli, and just all around, he has done amazing things in his short tenure at Yeshiva University. And it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Halpern to our conversation today. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. And I hope I have the secondary title of being the biggest Yankees fan to be on this show.
I will have to check, but despite that, as long as you didn't say the Mets, we're okay. You're a historian, and I remember the 1969 Mets and the Cubs. So we're more
too soon. Yeah.
That's it. So, Dr. Halpern, just very simply, much of your writing and a lot of your work as well has been trying to see how Jewish thought, Jewish knowledge, Jewish texts have impacted the American experience. And I know it's not fair, but in a brief few seconds, minutes, can you tell us a little bit about what you have found?
Sure. So I'm personally fascinated by the impact that Tanakh, that biblical ideas, particularly from our Bible, from the Hebrew Bible, from the Tanakh, has had on the American story. So from the, frankly, Christopher Columbus, who crossing the sea, describes his journey as a journey across the Red Sea, to the Puritans and the Pilgrims who saw their story, their arrival on our shores as the journey of Bnei Israel through Mitzrayim, sort of 2.0. Of course, not using that lashon, but whether it's a story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the story of Megillat Esther, as you mentioned, I edited a book with 27 different chapters on how the story of Esther has been threaded through the American political imagination, with figures ranging from Abraham Lincoln to Sojourner Truth to Nathaniel Hawthorne, having their Esther moments or thinking deeply about how the prism of the Purim story shapes their own perception of what America's highest ideals can and should be, to actually Shimshon HaGibor, of all figures. I wrote a short piece for Tablet magazine on Samson in America, and how Thomas Jefferson, in his diaries as a teen, talked about this manipulative woman, his mother, who was driving him mad. And he wrote about himself feeling like Samson being manipulated and nudged almost to death by Delilah. But the prism that he looked at his own story was through the story of Shimshon, particularly actually in the Black community. There's a whole book that recently came out called Black Samson, and tells a story about how John Brown, who was white but led a infamous raid to free slaves. So he thought of himself as Samson, as someone who could shake the temples of liberty and free the slaves. When he was arrested, he wrote about his own Samson-like actions in his raid. He then was executed and mourned by Frederick Douglass as having been a Samson-like figure. Frederick Douglass then died, and he was mourned as a Shimshon-like figure. So whether it's those seminal historical figures to the modern day usage of Tanakh by American presidents in their inaugural addresses, and we're not that far away from another inaugural address, and you could basically take it to the bank that whoever the president is, he or she will be citing the Bible, more likely, even though presumably this person will not be a Jew, Tanakh, as opposed to the New Testament. So I'm fascinated by how, in a time where there were very few Jews in America, the early years of America, where George Washington was citing his favorite biblical verse about sitting under the vine and fig tree where none shall make you afraid, which he referenced, of course, to a letter to the Hebrew congregation at Newport, to a time when there were many Jews in America, our own era. The Jewish story continues to inspire all Americans of all faiths, famous cultural and political leaders. And to me, it's a very exciting and frankly inspiring story that unfortunately with the decline of biblical literacy, the onus is on us, Jews, non-Orthodox Jews in the public sphere, to remind America of this rich cultural heritage of Tanakh as an articulation of the moral language of liberty of the United States.
So is it so much our Tanakh or just their Old Testament? In other words, can we give the credit to Jewish culture, or is it just Christian culture that references their Old Testament?
It's a great question. So fascinatingly enough, I would say there's no question that at the end of the day, there are uniquely Israelite, if you will, Hebraic, whatever the term you want to use is, visions, images, themes that are unique to our book that were quoted, that I think we can be proud to take credit for, in the sense that at the end of the day, when George Washington is turning to an image of Yerushalayim sitting in peace and security and sanctity to envision his own American polity, that's our image. Meaning there's nothing Christological about that. There's no overtones of Christianity whatsoever. He's citing this text to living Jews. So I think, of course, on some level, the Christians were exposed to our stories through the Old Testament, but I think many appreciated the uniquely Jewish perspective that it offered. There's a couple of great books by a scholar, James P. Bird, B-Y-R-D, and he talks about, for example, in the American Revolution, the second most quoted text by preachers, Christian preachers, was Hashem ish melchama, Hashem shemo, because the New Testament is useless when it comes to psukim that justify military action against, it's all about turning the other cheek. So military action against one's enemies. So non-Jewish Americans turn to Judaic texts, Az Yashir in this case, to give them strength and chizuk. And they, so I think, of course, on some level, the portal of entry for non-Jews was the quote unquote Old Testament as part of their Bible. But at the end of the day, these stories are uniquely ours. There's a fun one back to Esther, where in the years before the American Revolution, the colonists were wrestling with this idea. Well, we have this king who might or might not be actually paying attention to us, but he's definitely levying really bad policy, oppressive policies against us. This sounds like the Purim story, because we have this manipulated monarch who is being given bad advice by his minister, his prime minister, Lord North, in the case of England, and so internally wrestling with the ethics of revolution, they turn to the Jewish story, which frankly is not an important story in the Christian tradition at all, the story of Esther, and struggled with articulating, well, maybe he's getting Haman, his ministers are Haman, and he's more Melech Tipesh than Melech Rasha, to use the Gemara's distinction. So it's fascinating to me how the interpretive history of our text have been thought deeply about by Americans. I would just add that in today's day, we are seeing an amazing reclamation of Tanakh on Judaic terms. We have this hot off the presses, really exciting initiative that there's a group of evangelical Christians who are going to come. They don't want to convert us. Don't worry. They love Zionism. They love the Jews. And they actually, it's an amazing group called the Philos Project. One of Rabbi Sachs, Cha's last Zoom events, your viewers can look this up on YouTube, was an interview he did with the Philos Project, which is a wonderful group. They are going to come to the Bernard Revel Graduate School of Jewish Studies at YU to do a master's in Hebraic thought and learn Tanakh in Hebrew. They're going to crack their teeth like we all do on biblical Hebrew, and they're going to take a full course load in a Judaic Studies degree at Yeshiva University on our turf, on our terms, which I think is a really historic program showing the deep appreciation and recognition that the non-Jewish world has for our traditional text.
So I have a whole bunch of questions, but let me start with a simple one. While all of this is going on and the appreciation of Hebraic Judaic texts, was there an appreciation of Jews, or was it just the biblical Jew that the founding fathers and later generations enjoyed?
So it's a great question. So I think, in the case of George Washington, there was definitely a deep appreciation of Jews. Funny sort of anecdote, when Washington became the first president, all faith communities wrote him a letter of congratulations. There were around 2,000 Jews in America at the time. We wrote him 3 letters because no one could agree on who represents the Jew. Mind you, very little has changed. So there, he actually wrote back to all 3 letters. And there's a fascinating figure who could be a video conversation unto itself, but Mordechai Emanuel Noah, who was in the first third or so of the 19th century, the most famous Jew of his time, polymath, who was a playwright, a sheriff, an ambassador. And he also wrote to all the living presidents about his plans to build a homeland for the Jews in upstate New York. He would name the place Ararat because his last name was Noah, and this was this pipe dream that basically never materialized.
Just to interrupt, I have an original newspaper from that time.
Wow.
That was the article announcing the event of the establishment of the homeland.
That's amazing.
It's in my office.
That's amazing. So I'm a huge Mordechai Emanuel Noah groupie. And you can read his writings on Shabbos, and he frankly envisioned the role that Christians would play in building the state of Israel. Literally in 1848, he was giving speeches about this 100 years before the birth of the modern state of Israel. Really fascinating figure. But all the presidents wrote back to him, and one said, it would bring me no greater joy than seeing you lead an army of Jews back to the Holy Land. So I think on some level there's been appreciation. Obviously, there's been anti-Semitism over the course of American history. I just co-wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal over Hanukkah about Hanukkah and the presidency, and the most notorious incident of anti-Semitic government-sanctioned incident of Ulysses S. Grant essentially kicking out the Jews from part of his territory that he was overseeing militarily happened on the first night of Hanukkah, and that was the low point. And Ayin Sham, as they say, but Dr. Jonathan Cerna has a fantastic book called "When General Grant Expelled the Jews," writing about that episode. But on the flip side, his takana was reneged upon, was canceled by President Lincoln. And very same Dr. Cerna has a great book called "Lincoln and the Jews," about Lincoln's positive relationship with some figures in the periphery of his life. So a bit of a mixed bag. I think nowadays more and more when it comes to issues of legal issues of religious liberty and the like, the appreciation that other faiths have for being by the side of the Jewish people is something that is a modern phenomenon. Makes for some historically interesting, I guess, bedfellows, for lack of a better term. But to me is a fascinating example of non-Jews appreciating Judaism and our texts and our traditions.
So when I was growing up, we always spoke of the Judeo-Christian ethic that was behind American culture and society.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to have fallen totally off the How did it shift so quickly from the books you're writing of all of the great American leaders who continue to quote from Tanakh to a situation where it doesn't feel the same appreciation exists today?
Yeah, so I think it's funny. There's a story about Bibi in one of his previous iterations had given some speech about Moshe Rabbeinu drawing water from the way the Wall Street Journal had the anecdote recounting his speech was drawing water from Iraq, because he had given some remark, and lacking basic biblical literacy, spoiler alert, he drew the water from a rock, not Iraq, but the reporter had no idea. And only in religious journalism can you have someone covering this kind of story who lacks basic working knowledge of, frankly, what they're meant to be a journalist about. And so I think there's a lack of biblical literacy that explains a lot of it. I think obviously with the proliferation of easy access to all sorts of printed text and the like, there's no longer the unified language. I actually don't think it's much different on some level than the fact that, I don't want to presume anything, but I presume much of your audience and your congregants maybe used to watch the Oscars, the Academy Awards, and no longer do so. I can't imagine many people from the next generation will watch anyone under the age of 40 watches the Oscars, because the idea of having this unified national narrative, whether it's movies or lahavdil, obviously Tanakh, it's in our fractured media landscape, literary landscape, polarized times. I think we miss this idea of having a unified American story, and I think the onus is on us to remind America of that, what used to serve as the unifying national narrative. I mean, you have a few years ago, David Brooks in the New York Times writing about the Exodus story as America's unifying narrative. We at YU at the Strauss Center and Azrieli, YU's Graduate School of Education, are pulling together March 19th, a conference for high school educators with Jewish and Christian organizations. And we're literally calling it Restoring the American Story. And the idea is to have sessions and then pedagogical design sessions after each frontal presentation to say, how can we take the story of how Tanakh ideas inspired America, American letters, America's political philosophy, and the like into classrooms, to tell the story once more, to remind Americans, to combat this biblical illiteracy, so that the next generation of religious journalists, Jewish, Christian, or otherwise, will know that Moshe Rabbeinu drew water from a rock, at the very least. We're setting the bar, at least there as a baseline.
So let me go back. Another question that while we're
Sure.
speaking, while we're talking about, is this course that the evangelicals are going to be taking at Rabbi.
Yeah.
What about the issue of teaching Tanakh to non-Jews? Do we have
It's a
an
great
issue?
question. It's a great question. I would just say that we checked it. And there were faculty members that checked in with Rosh Yeshiva YU, and it's on the up and up, as we say. So I defer to their halachic judgment as always. But we we checked in with who we needed to check in with, and all great on that front. And I think also fascinatingly, part of the impetus with the Christian chevra, if you will, is meeting living Jews. And a lot of it is I was just on a plane back to Eretz Yisrael, where I am now, and there was a few young people from University of Oklahoma and Hillsdale College on something called Passages. And Passages is actually evangelical birthright, and they sent thousands of Christians to Eretz Yisrael to learn about Eretz Yisrael. And speaking to the leadership at Passages and the Philos Project, who runs it, they said, their young people have a gap in knowledge. They know that JC died, and then there's 1948. And you have this 2,000-year gap. Something happened in the middle, but we're not quite sure what. So we aim to fill that gap while also connecting rising Christian leaders with living, rising Jewish leaders. And I think Rabbi Sachs Zechron Bracha would always mention his friendship with the Archbishop of Canterbury, and I consider it part of my mission to have the future Archbishop of Canterbury meet the future Rabbi Sachs, in some sort of program organized by Yeshiva University, because I think we'd all be better for it.
And if you could put on a different hat for a moment, the one of
Sure.
the senior advisor to the provost,
Mhm.
university life is changing. What do you think will be the university in another 5-10 years? I'm not looking for how it will be different than it is today.
So a couple of things. I would say we're trying to be ahead of the curve in terms of what uniquely can Yeshiva University, with its rich rabbinic tradition, bring to emerging technology. So we actually have a Strauss Center class on artificial intelligence and Jewish ethics this year, co-taught by a Reeds faculty member and the engineer at Rabbi Navon at Mobileye in Israel, and navigating these issues. So I think as STEM becomes an increasing factor in our lives, it already is obviously an rapidly advancing technology, for us to think deeply about what can, not only the sort of defensive stuff, like how can we fight anti-Semitism online and the like, but the proactive, how can we inform how our tradition thinks about issues of AI and the Turing test and Chat GPT and the like. So it's a dream of mine. I haven't yet realized it, but to produce a book on major issues in advancing technology and halacha and Jewish ethics and the like. So years ago, before Chat GPT, someone pointed out to me that there's a Google Dead Authors Project, which could basically churn out a new novel by Mark Twain. And they said at the time, and I thought they were kind of exaggerating a bit, you could submit a tshuva in theory, to Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zichrono Livracha, and some algorithm would upload the Igros Moshe and would posting people. And I thought like that's we're a decade from that. And I'm sure ChatGPT could basically do some version of that at this point. So wrestling with those kind of issues, I think Yeshiva University is uniquely positioned. And I think also, balancing what we all learned as a b'di'evet, which is online education, which is Zoom and the like, which is great for half-hour lunchtime conversations between friends, but less great for a full day of college. Less ideal for sure. How can you use technology in positive ways to scale out things like graduate education and Azrieli, which we've mentioned, already offers a full Jewish education degree online. Revel is expanding its programs online. Our STEM programs are often offered online. So thinking about that, more of a global bent to YU I think is important. And also obviously Eretz Yisrael, which is so important in all our lives, and thinking how can we have an increased footprint in Eretz Yisrael. This current semester, we're wrapping up a pilot program in our SciSim School of Business, where the students took courses in business in an Israeli environment, also Zionist history with Dr. Gil Troy, who's a renowned Zionist historian, who just published a 3-volume set on Herzl's Zionist writings. And then we're thinking about this coming summer, we do all sorts of, whether it's a lab, a joint initiative with Bar Ilan University and archaeological digs, internships in both not-for-profits and startups and the like, to obviously online summer courses, thinking about what is the increase we can have this summer, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, in terms of our students contributing to the land of Israel, studying and learning and working in the land of Israel is obviously very important to us as well.
Still see the importance of a traditional based medrash, of a campus, of where people come together, or because I know in a lot of universities, even law schools and others, where people don't come to class anymore. They just listen to the recordings, and the recordings are now both video and also audio. Is it possible to get a yeshiva, not only a yeshiva university, but a yeshiva education without being there?
I would say no. To me, our product is a holistic product. You come to Yeshiva University for the immersive dynamic, the in-person dynamic with your Rabbi, with your studies teachers, with your general studies teachers. You come for those moments in the hallway, in the elevator, in the dorms, for the Shabbatonim and the like. That's irreplaceable. You can never translate that over Zoom. So I think obviously our core raison d'etre, the beating heart of Yeshiva University, obviously will always be in person. And the question is what sort of other, again, graduate degrees or non-sectarian can be scaled out globally and the like, what can be obviously helpful to the students and growth areas for the university. So that's what we're thinking about, that balance. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. I would not want to go to college online. You would not want to go to college online. And so, so we stand strong behind the in-person education of Yeshiva University.
And even on that same level, though, there has been this massive shift from liberal arts, which I would say is also going back to our original piece, biblical Tanakh, and over to professional schools, whether at Yeshiva University, Sims from Yeshiva College, other places as well have seen that same shift. Is it good for the Jews?
So I'm biased because in my second kippah, running or being the deputy director under Rabbi Dr. Meir Soloveitchik, my beloved colleague and mentor, we stand strongly in Torah Mata, in the classic great books of Judaism in the West. So on the one hand, of course, students are coming to YU who are interested in computer science and the like, but we at the same time are offering, frankly, stronger than there's ever been. We had this semester that's wrapping up now, 15 Torah Mata, like good old-fashioned Torah Mata classes, from Shakespeare in the Bible to the thought of Rabbi Sachs, to Judaism and art, to Shakespeare in the Talmud, to we're doing next semester Zionist political philosophy in the context of Western political philosophy, just countless classes bridging the great works of the Bible and the West. And so we have our classic liberal arts flagship Strauss Scholars Program, which is what we call essentially our Torah Model Honors Program, and we're doing interviews for that in a couple of weeks in Eretz Yisrael. And so so we stand strongly with our with our degel, with our logo, our Torah Model logo, and at the same time, obviously matching the market and desire from students and parents to make sure that our students land jobs in emerging and growing fields. And so one can be a Strauss scholar studying Churchill and Lincoln and C.S. Lewis and obviously Tanakh and Mishnah and Gemara and classical Parshanim and Shakespeare and the like, and Rabbi Sachs, while being a computer science major or being a biology major or being a political science major.
No, it's fascinating. By the way, when you mentioned Shakespeare and the Talmud, many years ago, I invited Rabbi Gedalia Dov Schwartz to Ida Crown to give a class about the Merchant of Venice, because Rabbi Schwartz had been an English teacher when he was younger.
Wow.
He loved the classics. In fact, I have his King Lear, which is with his signature inside. When they were getting his library, one of the things I took was some of his Shakespeare. But he ended up giving a lecture. I thought he was going to do the classic lecture about payments and all the things that Evan has, and instead he got up and he started comparing Shakespeare's Jew, Shylock, to the Jew of Malta from Marlowe, and gave a 40-minute lecture comparing in that period of time in England in literature, which I found fascinating. It was the kind of Torah Mada, was the kind of appreciation of culture that you don't find, unfortunately, too often. And while we only have a few more minutes, and I don't want to be unfair to you, when you do a class on Shakespeare in the Talmud, is that class really, is it well sought after? Do students still want to learn Shakespeare? Is it something they're really interested, or is there that small group of students?
Yeah, no, it's the class is full up. We have a wonderful Shakespearean scholar, Dr. Shana Trapito, who's published with Cambridge on the usage of Tanakh on the Renaissance stage. She's co-taught the classes with the aforementioned Rabbi Soloveitchik. They fill up. A rabbi, now Dr. Dov Lerner, who I know is familiar to your audience. He teaches classes on Milton and religion, and it's the hottest ticket in town. And the classes fill up. There's a wait list a mile long to get into these classes. Someone pointed out to me recently that ironically, the only people soon, Shakespeare's been canceled in certain circles, Aristotle and the like. So the only people that are going to be studying Aristotle and Plato are like modern Orthodox Jews in a few years, because we believe that classic works are important and thoughtful and can inform our lives. And so there's a deep passion. And I've had many Strauss scholars come to me and say the reason they're coming to Yeshiva University is for this great conversation, this conversation between Western text and Judaism, which really obviously is at the historical core of what YU stands for.
Now, I know you're always working on the next book or books. What's the next one you have coming out?
So the next one is Haggadah. It won't be ready for this coming year, but Emir Tzitcher for next year. Then I'm working on I don't know if he's a member of the community, but Jacob Kupiecki and I are working on Haggadah on the impact of the Yetziat Mitzrayim story on the American story, and it's basically going to be a running commentary whereby we use primary American documents, including our mutual friend Mordechai Emanuel Noah, to show how the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim has been thought of throughout the American story. Meha Puritans ad hayom hazeh. So stay tuned. Not Lashana Haba, but the Shana after that.
Magnificent. And one of these days I'll have to talk to Jacob to find out how he got you involved or you got him involved in that.
Sounds great.
It sounds fascinating. Believe it or not, our time is up. So I want to thank you for not only the half hour you had with us, but also for all of the work you're doing in these important areas. It's unfortunate that we don't spend as much time as we should with our Tanakh, and then we don't spend as much time as we do with appreciating how others appreciate our Tanakh as well. Doctor, enjoy your time in Israel. I could tell from outlets behind you on the wall, as well as the certificates that are there that were the certificates of your cherished grandfather-in-law, Rabbi Dr. Lamb, who we all miss so much. But you are, thank God, leading the charge. and
Thank you.
continue to do so for all of us, and for especially for the role of Tanakh in our lives itself. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much. It's been an honor to be in conversation with you.
It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.